Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Carol Looper, and I am a board member of the Columbus Metropolitan Club's Board of Trustees. And I used to be a reporter. I guess I still am, only now when I call with stories, they say thank you and there's no paycheck. Good to see everyone here today. Today, CMC presents 12 questions for the next governor of Ohio, sponsored by The Ohio State University, Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, and Hannah News Service, represented here by many friends and associates. Please help me thank them and welcome Jack Irvin, Senior Director of State and National Policy at Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. He will introduce our forum. Jack.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon, all. Everyone hear me okay? So I'm Jack Irvin, Senior Director of State National Affairs for Ohio Farm Bureau, and we're proud to be here and appreciate and support the mission of CMC and convening these public conversations every week and important community topics. Ohio and the nation, we're at a crossroads, and unfortunately at Farm Bureau we know that all too well, as farm income is projected to be at its lowest point this year in 12 years. So as we look to this fall's election, certainly questions abound about the future of our state's economy. What can we do to help grow the jobs that both employees and employers are in need of? And how can we make sure that the policy gets ahead of the change so that the opportunities and prosperity can rule the day? So let us explore these issues with our experts. Please welcome Adjunct Professor at Ohio State of John Glenn's College of Public Affairs, former State Budget Director and former VP of Business and Finance at Ohio State, Bill Shkurti. Senior Research Fellow for the Ohio Manufacturing Institute at OSU, Fran Stewart. And Assistant Professor of Journalism at Ohio University and Cleveland.com syndicated columnist, Thomas Suddes. Dr. Suddes? Dr. Suddes, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many familiar and public-spirited faces here this afternoon. Our state's at an interesting period in its history. This is Ohio's 215th year of statehood, and we're about to elect our 70th governor. The census tells us that in 1800, 3 years before statehood, Ohio's population was about 45,000 people, close to the population today of Dublin, the city up US 33. So take Dublin's roughly 45,000 people and spread it roughly evenly from Lake Erie to the Ohio River and from Pennsylvania to what became Indiana. And that's the Ohio our first governor, Edward Tiffin, faced and dealt with. As of a year ago, July, the census estimates Ohio's population at about 11.7 million people. From Edward Tiffin to 218, Ohio's growth and development resulted from the state's resources and the choices. And I think we should keep that word in mind, choices. These are not robots. They react to circumstances and ambitions and incentives. The choices its people and their elected leaders make. And Fran Stewart and Bill Shkurti have some questions, and some pointed questions perhaps, for Ohio's next governor about the choices he and someday she aims to make. Before we get to them, I was thinking about this on the way up here, and I was thinking of all the slogans I could think of from the past. Governor Rhodes's Jobs in Progress, Governor Gilligan's Let's Hear It for Ohio, Governor Celeste's Action Agenda, Governor Voinovich's Working Harder and Smarter, Doing More with Less, and without being disrespectful, I can't recall all the other ones to follow that, and we have to ask ourselves, and these are the questions these two people have posed very coherently, to what extent we've seen real change in the state for ordinary people. So my first question is for Fran, and your research found that Ohio's economy has declined relative to the nation over the last half century. What did your findings suggest about why that happened, and what can or should be the next governor do or consider doing about that?
Well, thank you for the question, Tom, and thank you to the Columbus Metro Club for the invitation to share this. And first, I would like to preface my answer, because the answer may make some of you feel like going out and jumping in that river over there. And I'm not from Columbus, so I don't know which river that is. But so it may feel very depressing. But I assure you, both Bill and I are very positive, upbeat people. We are can-do Midwesterners, and we feel that a good dose of reality, we can deal with reality, and we need some probably sobering pragmatism in order to move on and do the work that's necessary to get Ohio back on track. So Tom's question was, why has Ohio fallen in terms of, it had seen relative decline. It's actually been a 60-year period of relative decline compared to the rest of the nation. And Tom sort of hinted at all of the different efforts that have gone into to stopping that decline. But Ohio went from being having a per capita personal income that was 9% above the national average in 1953 to now we sit at about 9% below the national average. The last time Ohio was at the national average was in 1968. And so what has caused that? By and large, that can be traced to the loss of 700,000 manufacturing jobs. We still are a very manufacturing-intensive state, but we just don't have the same number of workers. There are lots of, people point lots of fingers at why have we lost our manufacturing employment, and often they might point to the South and say it's domestic competition, or they point to China and say it's trade, it's foreign competition, but what our report spells out is that this is largely due to automation. The big culprit in this has been automation, and that's not likely to change. So today, one worker can do what it took 4 to do back in the 1960s. But at the same time, we now produce twice as much. I mean, people often think that we aren't a manufacturing state anymore, but we actually produce twice as much as we did in the 1960s. And so how do we deal with that? What is it that we need to do to move on in the face of the fact that this automation is going to continue in all aspects of the economy, not just in manufacturing?
Thank you. I have a question now for Bill, and this is particularly pertinent, I think, given that we are in election year and also at a time when the economy is moving in many directions. Hardly a week passes without one office holder or a candidate claiming that he or she is business friendly and that assorted subsidies and incentives are tickets to a higher prosperity. How much of that is sound reasoning, what your research indicates? How much of it's hooey? And what is the track record of Ohio's executive and legislative branches in that regard? I might mention quickly that today's Wall Street Journal has an interesting story about New Jersey, where the journal reports former Governor Christie was very generous in business incentives, and the new governor is trying to sort through them because the cost has proven exceptionally higher than they thought. So, Bill, what has Ohio accomplished or not really accomplished with all these series of business incentives and tax policy and so forth?
Okay. Well, thank you, Tom, and this is a serious subject, but I can't let this opportunity pass of being on a stage with Tom Suddes, who is truly a distinguished legend in the Ohio Press Corps. And I need to point out that Tom just recently earned his PhD, which has given new meaning to the term lifelong learning. So congratulations, Tom, on your PhD from The Ohio University. I also want to point out that a copy of our paper, Towards a New Ohio, and a one-page summary is on the back table back there for anybody who wants that. The question Tom asked is a fair one, a good one, and a relevant one. And I think the short answer is that Ohio, like a lot of other things, is kind of in the middle. It isn't quite out as far as some states in granting incentives, but it's more liberal than others. The point I would make, and there's a chart right below Fran that displays graphically what she just talked about, that Ohio's decline relative to the rest of the nation has been relatively steady since 1953, regardless of who's been president, what party they have, who's been governor, what party they are. It's underlying structural changes. Foreign competition, domestic competition has contributed some, but as Fran mentioned, the major challenge has been automation, and you cannot legislate against automation. So you have to figure out how to deal with it. One theory is that, well, you just attract more jobs by offering incentives to manufacturers. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. The example of one that works is, I remember from when I was much younger, when we originally brought the Honda motorcycle plant in here to Marysville. That grew to an automobile plant that still employs something like 30,000 between Honda and its suppliers, 30,000 Ohioans in good paying jobs that haven't gone overseas, to a good corporate citizen that Honda has been. So that's an example of a success. The incentives at that time were what today would be regarded as modest. Yeah. At the same time, Pennsylvania made a similar deal with Volkswagen to put a rabbit plant in Pennsylvania. That plant failed, the Volkswagen Rabbit failed, and Pennsylvania was stuck with a white elephant that they're still trying to fill that facility. The point I'm making is there is no silver bullet. There is no immediate automatic slogan type response. Now, in defense of our political officials, when they run for office, they need to be able to explain to people what it is they're going to do that's different. They need to be optimistic. They need to be able to translate that into a slogan, so it's not all their fault. But there's also a tendency to hide behind slogans and not deal with the issues. And as Fran explained, she and I both have grown up in Ohio. She grew up near Manchester, right? Mm-hmm. Which is losing a major power plant. I grew up in Akron and can remember when you could smell the rubber factories after it rained, and that was progress. And to sometimes drive through parts of downtown Akron today and remember what it was like is very disheartening. But I think we are also optimistic about where Ohio can go and what it needs to do, but it's a long, slow slog, and it takes a real hard-nosed, practical look rather than an ideological look. And we talk in our paper, I won't go into them in detail now, but we'll be glad to respond to questions about what some of those things might be. One example would be, I think, to avoid the desire to get a silver bullet. And the example we use in the paper is what the state of Wisconsin did to attract that Foxconn factory to Wisconsin. Something like $3 billion in incentives for a plant that is going to make screens, I think, for handheld phones and stuff. And they say, well, it's going to be up to 13,000 jobs or something like that. If the past is any indication, those jobs are going to be automated before that plant starts to pay off for Wisconsin. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't attract manufacturing. In fact, as Fran mentioned, manufacturing, particularly advanced manufacturing, is part of Ohio's strength. But you need to build a number of a diverse set of industries that would include manufacturing and service industries. You need to go after the small industries. You know, at one point, Amazon was one guy in a garage. What we need to find is the one guy or gal in a garage that's going to be the Amazon of the future, and that's where Ohio can start to turn this around.
And I would just like to follow up on what Bill was saying and actually plug a different report. Is there was a very recent report out of the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research, and they were talking that they were studying specifically manufacturing intensive areas, and what they found was that business tax incentives and business tax cuts by and large did not move the needle in terms of in terms of improving employment specifically, but what they were espousing are some of the same things that we that are part of our conclusion, is that we need to invest in our infrastructure and we need to invest in our people, and we need to make sure that our people have the skills that are aligned with the skills that employers need.
Speaking of things we need, I meant to ask this earlier, and I was talking before to our two panelists about this, and I'm dying of curiosity. I didn't get the answer, really. I'll start with with Fran and then ask Bill. You directed these questions at people who wish to be governor of Ohio. Have you had any feedback from people who wish to be governors of Ohio to the questions you posed about our future?
I would say we've gotten pretty solid feedback. I mean, people have, you're here, so that's good. I'll turn it over to Bill. He's probably been monitoring that more. That's a tricky question in terms of the politics.
It is.
so.
It's been fascinating. I want to stress that when we released this, we didn't think it's going to be an instant hit. We're in this for the long haul, and we want to get this idea of trying to lift up the discussion in the gubernatorial campaign to more policy-oriented, but we're not naive. We realize that's not going to happen.
You mean we're
overnight.
not rock stars now,
We're not
Bill?
rock stars. We've gotten very, very favorable comments from the press, including a wonderful column that Tom wrote
right.
and a wonderful editorial in the Dispatch. And they were one of our major audiences because we recognize that assuming we have debates in the fall, someone from the Ohio Press Corps is going to be moderating that debate, and these questions will help that person focus. So that part's been
Right.
a
We
success.
need reporters to continue to ask these questions and hold the candidates to having a really thoughtful discussion about what our direction needs to be.
Now, the interesting thing has been the campaigns. They have been interested. There was one of the campaign advisors to one of the campaigns was at our press conference. I've talked to some of the people in the other campaigns. I would say they've been interested, but they've been guarded. Now, I think that's for two reasons. One is if you've ever been through a primary, primaries don't tend to turn on big issues. They turn on goofy stuff. And you had a lot of goofy stuff going on in this primary, so I don't think you have much attention being paid to more substantive issues. Hopefully now that you got the two gubernatorial candidates set up, that will happen. The second thing is, and having worked in a statewide campaign, I know how this works. What the candidates or their advisors are probably saying to the staff is, read this report, take a look at it, tell me what you think we should do, but whatever you do, let's not put anything in writing that somebody can pull out of context and turn it into a negative 30-second ad and clobber us with it. And unfortunately, that is where politics is today, and that kind of interferes with the kind of debate we would hope to have. Having said that, I think we're hoping that this paper, along with, I think, the voters' natural interest in the state's economy, will cause the gubernatorial candidates to begin to articulate what they plan to do. So we'll have to wait and see.
Well, and so what do we normally hear from our political leaders when they're talking about the economy? They want jobs, 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 right? And so what we lay out in the report is that in some ways we actually have been successful in bringing jobs to Ohio. Political leaders of both parties have had their successes. We have added 1.7 million jobs over the past 50 to 60 years at the same time that we've sustained these 700,000 losses in manufacturing jobs. But the problem is that by and large, these jobs have not paid what the manufacturing jobs that they've replaced paid. And so that is an issue going forward, is that it can't just be about any old job. It has to be about where are the good paying jobs that sustain a middle income lifestyle and middle income families. Where are those, and what do we need to build the workforce that will appeal to the companies that need those skills, and what can we do to grow our own businesses of the future that are going to pay good wages.
Yeah, good point. Tom, may I add just one thing? There's two other things that surprised me. One group of people who are very interested in what we did, and I've been contacted directly, are different members of the Kasich administration. Now, I would have thought that given that he's a lame duck and they're going out of power, they're considering other things like where am I going to get a job and everything. But they're very interested in this report, which tells me, one, they're worried about their legacy, which is totally appropriate, but they also care about the state and how they're doing. So I thought that was interesting. We also had two groups, the Ohio Manufacturers Association and the Chamber of Commerce, who reached out to us, and I talked to their officials. They were really excited about this and have distributed the report to their members. So getting that word out. And then we've gotten interesting contacts from different individuals that are just citizens. One guy was a county development director who thought it was really interesting. We heard from the Business Research Center at Ball State University in Indiana who was interested in what we're doing. So we're hoping, much like the ripples in a pond, that this starts out modestly but begins to develop some momentum and other people pick it up. And in that case, we will consider that a success.
Before I ask my next question, I do want to mention something. I know that everyone in this room, because of your occupations, your interests, or your civic mindedness, are flooded with information and documentation. The web's almost a dangerous flood, not a good flood sometimes. But I will tell you, because I teach this stuff and also because I myself am, my office looks like Miss Havisham's wedding reception with books instead of cakes on the table, that this report has a special value because it does something I think I try to have journalism students always think of when they're writing about public affairs, explaining how things really work. A lot of what we talk about in public policy and politics, no matter how educated we are based on assumptions without data to back those assumptions up. I think one of the great virtues of this report, which is also posted online at the John Glenn College's site, is to give us some facts to have a discussion that's informed on the basis of information and not supposition. I'm from a part of a state that's been somewhat hit badly by these developments, and it helps explain why sometimes our office holders, however well-intentioned they are talking past the problem and not at or to the problem. Which brings us to a question that's related to education, which is on the minds of everybody in the state, financially and otherwise, and this is something that Fran wrote about and talked about. I think it's fair to say that your research findings are that relative to employer needs, Ohio's workforce is underskilled. And assuming I interpret that correctly, what should we or its localities like school districts and so forth do to close the skills gap?
Well, actually, it's confusing. I guess I'm going to sound political here. It's kind of confusing. Without a doubt, the Ohio workforce today is better educated than the workforce 50 or even 15 years ago. But serious gaps do exist between the skills that employers want and the skills that our workers have. Now, part of this is a legacy of the activities that the industries that we have had for the past several decades, your workforce doesn't change on a dime. And so some of this is that the market is just changing faster than people can change their skill sets. But what's really problematic in the policy realm is that estimates of the size and the nature of the gaps vary. So it depends. So there are very respected research institutions that look at this problem, and depending on which one you agree with, the answer is very different in terms of what should be done policy-wise. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says that the jobs that are going to be added through 2024 are going to require 20% to have a bachelor's degree or higher. If you look at the Georgetown workforce on education, on education in the workforce, then they say that we need like a third of all jobs are going to need somebody with a bachelor's degree, and then there are other organizations that say even higher than that. And when you look at the actual jobs that we have right now, if you just compared on paper, it seems as though we actually do have a workforce that's educated enough for the jobs that are out there. But the question really is, are they educated in the areas that we need them to be educated in? Are they aligned in the right areas? And then there's also an area that is often overlooked, is that, so I've done a fair amount of research on STEM, and most of the time when educators and political leaders talk about STEM, they're always focusing on the high side, the high education side of STEM, meaning the scientists and the engineers and the computer programmers. And what is actually clear is that a lot of workers who do more of what is known as the middle skills, they are actually very highly trained STEM workers. It's just that they get often overlooked for the knowledge that they have, much of the knowledge that they've come to has either been on-the-job training, through vocational training, through 2-year community college and certificate programs. And so they are very knowledgeable, and if you talk to manufacturers, they are sort of a missing group of workers right now. And so what we call for in the report, and what I'm sort of pleading with people to do is we need to do a better job of trying to align what the skills we're encouraging young people to be pursuing and where really are the needs that employers have for workers, especially in those good-paying jobs that are going to be good jobs for the future.
I'd like to address a question directly to Bill, and then we'll come back to another one for Fran. One of the things I found most striking in the report was looking at some of the counties in Ohio that have been had the largest declines in per capita income, and that shows in all kinds of ways. And I'm up in some of these counties myself, and since everyone in Columbus seems to be from someplace else originally, I thought you, Bill, could tell us a little bit about these 4 counties, which are in order: Montgomery, Marion, Richland, and Trumbull had the largest declines of our 88 counties in per capita income. And why in general did that happen?
Well, a lot of it has to do with manufacturing jobs being lost. Marion's a great example. When I read this, it really surprised me, although Marion's doing better than some other places. They used to have an outfit there called Marion Steam Shovels. Marion Steam Shovels dug the Panama Canal. I mean, talk about a big deal. The Marion Steam Shovel plant closed in the mid-'70s because of competition from abroad. They couldn't keep up with it. Marion now has a Whirlpool plant, so I think they've kept some. So the one that, when I read, it actually made me sick, because I had friends that grew up in Dayton. In the 1960s, Dayton was recognized, in fact, Montgomery County had above average income, and Dayton was recognized as being one of the most progressive communities in the country, the example of the middle class. In fact, the pollsters had cited, I think, the wife of a machinist in Dayton as the typical American voter, and a middle-class existence was really great. And Dayton's just been clobbered with job losses. The big one was losing National Cash Register, which at one time employed something like 30,000 people, employs none. And then that double kick when the headquarters moved out. They lost a Frigidaire plant, they lost a GM plant. Mansfield, you have the same litany, and you read it, and especially if you're attached to Ohio, I think as all of us are, it makes you sick. But you can't go back to what was. You have to figure out, how do we learn from that and then move forward? And what we talk about a little bit in the paper is that Ohio is it's not like we're a sickling that can't keep up with the other folks. We have some tremendous advantages in this state. One is our location, which is very central for logistics and that type of stuff. Another is our history in advanced manufacturing. We have one of the highest incidences of robots in the country. Now, that means they've replaced some jobs, but they've opened up jobs for others. We have access to fresh water, sometimes too much of it, but that's a problem for Western states. Our housing is affordable. So the key is, how do we take what Ohio has and exploit that on a steady basis over time to get where we need to be, which is to advance the state forward. And there's no reason we should take second line to anybody else, but we need to be unified ourselves. And what we need to do is get beyond ideology and look at pragmatism as to what works and what we can adapt and how we can create, not chasing after necessarily all the big names, but how you create the big names of the future. The future of Ohio is going to be in garages and lofts of individuals that come up with new ideas and then get supported and grow that into something, not in chasing after stars.
And can I add something real quick? So that's key, what Bill just said, is that we can't, often what passes for policy is something that seemed to work out on the West Coast, or seemed to work in New York or Boston or some other place, and we try to just drop it here in Ohio without really thinking about where's our competitive advantage, what is it that we do really well in Ohio. Is it realistic that we can suddenly remake ourselves from being a heavy manufacturing area into suddenly the best tech area in the, I mean, what makes sense for Ohio? What is it that we're good at? And then be really proud of what it is that we're good at and have a little bit of swagger about it. But oddly enough, coincidentally, I was actually talking to a man who'd been a longtime economic development in Marion just last week. He's now at OSU Marion, the campus there. And he was talking about the long, slow death of Marion's steam shovel. And this is a really proud history for Marion, that they dug the Panama Canal. That's pretty cool. And so, but this has been a decades-long slide. And the final warehouse finally closed 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And now the name is being erased from memory. And you know what his response was? He said, you know, sometimes it's good to have a funeral and just move on. And that's what maybe we need to do a little bit here, is we need to recognize what was in the past, what we were really great at in the past, but and sometimes those pasts carry through now. Those are huge building blocks. But we've got to figure out what we do now and for the future, and not just be trying to go back to our glory days, because maybe our glory days are about what our future is ahead, but we've got to be realistic, but at the same time optimistic, because we can do this.
We will move to audience questions in just a few minutes. While I'm asking my last questions of the panel, please feel free to line up at the microphones located around the room to ask our panelists questions. My last question, I think it'll be the last one, depending on timing, is something for both of you. I'd like to start with Fran and then go to Bill. This issue raises a lot of questions in both federal elections and state elections. What is the role, from what your research indicated, of foreign trade, the foreign trade deficit in Ohio's manufacturing job loss? I think you developed some job loss estimates, I believe, and is this more of a federal thing or a state thing, or what should we do, if anything, about that, depending on the numbers you two developed?
Go ahead.
Yeah, it does play a role, so it isn't something to be ignored. There is evidence, one of the areas of Ohio that's really been hit hard is steel, and it is true that China does cheat. Cheat means they sell steel here for less than it costs them to make because they have excess capacity. Now, having said that, this is where this gets tricky. So you decide, all right, we're going to put tariffs on Chinese steel, and then the tariffs go back and forth. You've got more people in this state involved in using steel in making cars and appliances than in producing steel. In fact, I think I read somewhere the ratio is like 10-1. So where we are right now is we appear to be on the verge of a trade war with China over steel, with Canada over steel, and with Mexico over steel, and maybe with Europe over steel. So if the overall cost of steel, to buy steel in Ohio, goes up, yeah, maybe there'll be some more steel workers employed, but what does that do to our auto industry? What does that do to our appliance plants? What happens if the other side retaliates with tariffs on our farm goods? So this is the dilemma we're facing. So yes, federal policies have a lot to do with what's happened in Ohio and the other Great Lakes states. We have not managed the trade issues well. I think the federal government is partially responsible. I think also the resentment at elites. I have an economics degree, an undergraduate degree, so I'm sympathetic to economists, but an economist at a university who has a tenured, well-paid position pontificates that foreign trade is great for America, therefore we need more of it. And in fact, he or she is correct. Foreign trade in general is good for the country and has helped, but there are people that get left behind. And these people will say, they're people that live in Warren or Youngstown or Mansfield. I worked all my life. I followed the rules. I did what I was supposed to, and now I'm screwed and nobody cares. And that's resentment is what politicians have been quick to pick up on, but they've been slow to deal with in a thoughtful way. And I think one of the interesting issues that will come out of this gubernatorial campaign is who speaks to what we call in the paper the forgotten Ohio, the forgotten Ohioans. And there are really two groups of people. There are people that are forgotten, their communities have been forgotten because they've lost manufacturing jobs, the Mansfields and the places like that. And then even within prosperous communities like Columbus, there are people that work hard as janitors, as maids, as healthcare assistants, as cooks, as waiters and waitresses. They're working hard and full-time, and they are a minor illness away from bankruptcy. And what do we as a state and society owe them? The governor candidate that can speak to both of those forgotten Ohioans and also keep the part of Ohio that's doing well, I think is the one, hopefully, that will succeed in the next election. But getting there is going to be a real challenge.
I would agree with everything Bill said, but if you're wanting to know sort of about the size and numbers, the estimate that we had in the report was that foreign competition is about, the job loss from foreign competition is really about a third what the loss due to automation was. And so whenever you hear, oh, if it weren't for the fact that jobs were sent to Mexico or jobs were sent to China, which is problematic. I mean, I was just interviewing a classmate of mine that I grew up in who's lost his job and had to pack up the machines that were sent to Mexico for when the jobs were gone. So it certainly is a problem, but don't believe anyone when they say, if we could just get those jobs to onshore, then we don't have a problem anymore, because the automation trend is going to continue, especially if we can't get the skills issue right. Because if employers can't find people with the right skills and at the right price, but if they can't find them with the right skills, then that gives them more reason to try to automate.
Thank you very much. I want to put one footnote in about this. I couldn't help it. I can't help myself sometimes. You know that Ohio's biggest trading partner by far is Canada, and that we exported almost $19 billion worth of goods and services in the last recent year, 38% of our total exports. I mention that because evidently there's been some news stories recently about Canada being not seen as that welcome to people in Washington. So, and most of that, by the way, as Bill might have suggested, is equipment and machinery, highly intricate, complex stuff that Ohio supplies, no one else can. The Canadians buy from us. So just to keep that in mind before the next hockey game anyway. We'll now move to the, it's your turn. It's our tradition to take audience questions. Please state your name and ask your question. We'd like to get to as many questions as possible. So in fairness to everyone, please avoid long editorial comments. So let's get started, and somebody is at a microphone, I hope, to get going. Welcome. And please ask our panel your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Fox with the Pizzuti Companies. I grew up in Montgomery County in Dayton, and my father worked at NCR, and so I very much share the sadness over what happened there. On a different note, to follow up about advanced manufacturing, I have had opportunities to see some of Ohio's advanced manufacturing efforts at work, and I'm curious what you think the potential is for that, and also if you could talk a little bit about what advanced manufacturing means and how it's different than how we made things in the past.
Well, if manufacturing is probably not what most people's image of manufacturing once was. I mean, manufacturing is not the dirty, with dirty plants that's dark and really dangerous. It is completely automated in many respects, not everywhere, but I was in Northwest Ohio and at the international paper plant that makes Dixie cups, and there were thousands, millions of Dixie cups flying through the air through these little like hamster tubes. They were just zipping by, and very few workers there. I visited steel mills where once employed thousands of workers, and now you see computer workers who sit at a console and push buttons to make sure that the right mix of I don't know. I'm not a steel maker. I don't know, but the steel is at the right level of heat and mixture and everything, and that's done at a computer console, and there are now manufacturers who manufacture to tolerances that are so minute and so exacting that you couldn't even imagine what they produce. And we do all of that here. And in some ways, we're more diverse, and in other ways, and we want, and maybe the lesson that we can take from this, from what we've gone through for the past 50 years, is maybe it's not good for communities to have most of their employment in one activity, one industry. And so what we are seeing are more diverse efforts and activities and products, and that's what we need to see. That's what will bring our economy back, is we need to harness technology to make value-added products that will enable good wages for our workers. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. We need to focus on what are we good at producing, and make sure that we are innovating and doing and creating the kind of products that people are going to want, and that add value, that give us a little bit of pricing power so that we can pay our workers well.
Yeah, and another way to look at it is that all manufacturing has some degree of automation, but advanced manufacturing has a high degree of automation and has a lot of digital equipment involved. Mm-hmm. So it still takes people, but doing different things, and less people than it would before. But it's also a tremendous growth opportunity, and Ohio has a strength in that area. So our position has always been, you need to recognize your base and your strengths, and one of those for Ohio is manufacturing, particularly advanced manufacturing, so you want to stay competitive, but you also want to diversify into some other areas.
Right, and I should give a plug. Wait, I messed up. Hold on for a second. So over at the Ohio Manufacturing Institute, they are studying Manufacturing 5.0, and that is exactly the question that they're looking at, is what does the next wave of manufacturing, that is when everything is digitized, when chips are embedded in all sorts of machinery and all sorts of processes, and so you're interconnected from your supply chain all the way to your customer base, and then you're getting all of that data that you're able to study. That's what they're doing in manufacturing right now. It's the beginning of the curve. I mean, there are still old plants that function in old ways, but that's what the future is that you're going to have very, very connected, digitally connected plants that this improves productivity, it improves efficiency, and we can win at that if we, as long as we don't turn away from it, as long as we recognize that that's the way of the future, and that we can capture that and be second to no one.
We have some more people. Next question, please.
My name's Burl Pickle Antonio. I serve as a school board president here in Gahanna. And we actually have the report as a topic on our agenda at our Student Learning and Achievement Committee this month. I guess my question to you is, in my personal opinion, I think our K-12 education system, we don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be. So in my personal opinion, I think we should be making sure that our kids are educated for whatever those jobs end up being. My question, I guess I have two questions. Number one, do you disagree with that at all? And if so, do you think that there's something that we should be doing differently at the K-12 level? But secondarily, what do you think from the governor's office, what do you think the policies are directed towards I guess specifically K-12 or pre-K-12 education that will make a difference?
Well, thank you for that question, because that's an area that I'm particularly interested in and focused on. I've done a fair amount of research on STEM and the importance of STEM to regions, and I can tell you that STEM is important, but so are soft skills. And employers want people who can think, and the notion that innovation and new technological advancements come just because somebody has a degree in science or a degree in engineering is just not so. I mean, you also need people with the vision and the personal skills to sort of make the connections between, oh, that could be an interesting product that people would be willing to buy, or that's the science that I can build on and turn into a different product. And in reality, people who do science and math, they're not just STEM people. They often also have soft skills. So we've got to focus on that piece of making people making sure that we're turning out people who are critical thinkers, who are problem solvers, people who have interpersonal skills, that they can actually talk to people. Because I talk to manufacturers, and that's there. I talked to a manufacturer up in Cleveland who's now having to hold classes with new hires in how to react to each other and how to talk to each other, because he was finding that all they wanted to do was talk through their phones, and they didn't want to actually engage with each other, and that they couldn't take feedback. I mean, everything was seen as being too critical of them. And so they're engaging in like etiquette classes or interpersonal skills. But also, I think we need a resurgence in focusing on high school and what kids should be exposed to when they come out of high school. And that partly, I think they need more career education. I think we need earlier career education, not to try to pigeonhole kids into an area, but just to let them know what's available and how what they take in high school sets them up to whether they can get on that path that they want to be on. Because research shows that a lot of kids make decisions in 6th and 7th grade that close opportunity for them by the time they get to high school. And we don't want that to happen. We want every kid out there to maximize his or her potential. And I would also make a plea for more and more respected vocational training, apprenticeship, more job opportunities and internships for teenagers, because we're losing people being connected to the workforce when they're young, and that actually is a problem for the future. And so I commend you for thinking about this report, because I'm right there with you.
Let's go to our next question. Thank you.
Amen. I'm Bill Lafayette. I own Regionomics. I recently did some work on job growth by education and training level, job and wage growth, through the expansion. And what I found was that wage declines have been fairly pervasive across the education spectrum, but very troublingly, job growth is much slower for jobs that don't require a college degree. And my question really concerns the people who don't have college degrees, who are lower skill, who may be chronically unemployed or underemployed, who can't make ends meet. What do we do for those folks?
You want to?
Yeah, let me start. And then, that's part of when we talk about the forgotten Ohio, even if you accept the most optimistic or aggressive estimates of who needs training beyond high school, you're still going to have 35% of your jobs, and I would argue probably more than that, can be filled by people who just have a high school diploma. The question is then, if someone is working full-time, one, what do you owe them, or what does society owe them in the way of health insurance and a minimum wage and that type of thing? And what do you do about people that have dropped out of the labor force because of opioid addiction or health issues and that kind of thing? And as a society, we seem to be going backwards instead of forwards in addressing those issues. So I think you're absolutely right.
I just came here I was down visiting where I grew up. I actually grew up on the Kentucky side of the river, but I have longtime roots. I have a family farm down there that went back 200 years before Ohio statehood. So I guess I can put my Ohio roots up against anybody. But so I was down talking to a former classmate of mine who worked at one of the coal-fired plants that's shutting down, that has shut down. And he is now going to be out of a job. He was a fantastic maintenance worker. He didn't finish, he finished high school, but he doesn't have a college degree. He was making good money at the plant there. His wife is about to have heart surgery. He has no health insurance anymore because he was a subcontractor and he gets nothing from the health insurance. So his wife is looking at least $130,000 in surgery.
We have two more people. We want to get
Okay,
to more fast
but I'm
questions.
just going to say, so what he's being told to do is he has to go back and completely retrain. Now, the only option for him is that he could take a job in Louisville, but then that means he has to move 3 hours away. There needs to be shorter-term training for people who have skills. I mean, they're not unskilled. They have skills, but there've got to be faster, more efficient ways to plug these people in to opportunities, and then more help in trying to figure out helping them, because he was complaining that he doesn't know how to do all this online stuff. He's never done that before. I mean, he always got jobs by meeting people in person. And so there's got to be help for plugging them in to where their skills align with other opportunities, but maybe on paper it doesn't look like they do.
Can I go into a segue? I think you gave me a great opportunity here. Hi, Kathy Lowry-Gallowitz, career Air Force veteran, Vanguard veteran is my for-profit social enterprise. I've read your report start to finish. Thank you. I've even shared it with the governor's campaign. So I love what you have said. I want to highlight what veterans bring to the workforce. And I believe that veterans are part of the solution of some of the things that you're looking at. Bill, you talked about what's the next big name that's coming out of a garage? Well, there are a lot of veteran entrepreneurs who are eager to start their own businesses. If any of you can support Columbus Bunker Labs, other kind of veteran initiatives, that would be great. Point number 11 of your 12-point questions is, where do we find workers who can pass a drug test and ensure we have a safe workforce? And shortened pathways for employment. I think that's what you were talking about, Fran. And also apprenticeships. Veterans are ideal candidates for that. So the question is, how do you see us potentially leveraging what our veterans bring to the workforce to help us address some of our workforce concerns? Don't want to put you on the spot, but I think it's a really important question that we all need to be thinking about. Thank you.
One of the things that it boggles my mind why someone wouldn't want to hire a veteran. To me, that's like, why do we even have to ask this question? But my understanding is that one challenge that veterans have is that they don't speak the same language as business people do. And so that seems like a relatively easy fix, is we just need to somehow provide some crosswalk between what the terms veterans are used to talking about and how they describe what they know how to do, and put it into a better context. And so that's...
I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to ask our last guest if she'd be willing after the meeting to talk to our guest one-on-one, our last questioner, and I'd like to turn it over to Carol.
Thanks, Tom. I hope you all found this informational and perhaps worrisome, but we certainly got a lot of information. We encourage you to continue the conversation, as Tom said. We have coffee and cookies in the back, and I hope our panelists will stay for a bit. The CMC patio we have in the back that Jane mentioned is the place where you can get more information about joining. It's our little membership spot in the summertime. Please help me thank our sponsors, The Ohio State University, the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, and Hannah News Service. And let me thank our speakers, and you thank them too, please. Bill Shkurti, Fran Stewart, and Tom Suddes. And thanks to all of you for being here. We hope to see you next week.